over the past week, give our athlete take on it, how it translates, how it relates, and then after that, we'll open the room for questions and interviews. Or sorry, if you want to provide your own insights, this is also being streamed and will be on our YouTube and podcast platforms. But yeah, that's kind of it. So, Jed, you want to take it away?
Welcome. Yeah, welcome insights, welcome new conversations into, kind of what people are seeing, what people are thinking, what other topics should we be covering. And that's what's really neat about this time is we got to be covering the world. So this first one, we're going to dive into the Chris Webber entrance into where's he's headed. So he just raised with a partner $100 million fund. And something I'm going to point out after, Amobi, you give me your insights on this, is going to be the difference between private equity and venture capital. But he raised a $100 million private equity fund and was able to say, we want to go into the cannabis industry. We want to see the legalization of it and begin to identify how we can make the playing field equal, how we can neutralize what is currently happening in the cannabis industry, which is the people who have been condemned, criminalized, and imprisoned for the last 50 to 100 years are not being allowed to take advantage and become owners of the growth in the industry. So where did you see this as? I mean, $100 million. Chris Webber, obviously one of the big names in sports. Where do you see this going?
It's really interesting. Not only Chris Webber, but another athlete that's based in the Atlanta area, Theo Ratliff, just recently opened a private equity fund as well. So for context, private equity is different from venture capital, which has been really popular amongst athletes. Private equity companies are, private, already, operating at a, pretty standard rate, whereas venture capital, you're almost kind of betting on startups and stuff like that. So from the standpoint of Chris Webber, I think it's really interesting. We've heard of a number of different athletes getting involved. A couple of weeks ago, you spoke about Megatron, getting involved. I know Al Harrington's another athlete, Matt Barnes. There's so many different athletes getting it into cannabis from the building phase, if that's the right word to say. Whereas Chris Webber's, looking for a way to get in it from a private equity standpoint. So what does that look like? Whether it's mergers and acquisitions, whether it's, funding, whether it's, buy and optimizing it for greater returns. $100 million is quite quite a large amount of money. So I'm interested to see what they're going to do. We've seen SPOCs, come into play lately. We've seen venture capital. We've seen, athletes become entrepreneurs in the space. But this is the first time I'm seeing, athlete raise a private equity fund to get into the cannabis space. So I'm personally excited to see about it and see where he goes and what companies he's targeting when it comes to cannabis.
And that private equity distinction, I want to make clear that instead of venture capital, which is going for, and I'm getting an echo. I don't know why I'm getting an echo. In venture capital, you go for that startup entrepreneur. We're going to help these people scale up. Private equity is looking for those established companies already. And in the title private equity, it is going to grant and take ownership, sometimes all the way up to 100% ownership, whereas venture capitals tries to stay a little bit lower in the amount of equity that they raise. So looking at this, it is a really strategic play to say, we know there are businesses out there. We know there are people in the cannabis industry that are minority owned and looking to grow and scale. Where are those groups? Where are those individuals that we can come to and provide the capital and provide some of the business scalability, the efficiencies? Amobi, as you are a business owner, I am a business owner, you realize there are endless things that you are learning on a day-to-day basis. And that's really what this is going to be. It's going to be, here is some capital, and more importantly, here is how you run and grow a business in a new industry. So this is one, and I'd love anybody in the room to raise their hand and kind of contribute to where they think this is going. Athletes in particular are getting into this space because they have been using it as a rehabilitation. They've been seeing what this chemical, or what this plant and what chemicals can do from a holistic and a therapeutic perspective, despite all of the social and kind of fun aspects to it. And I think that's why you see so many professional athletes diving into this, is because we were so concerned with the opioid epidemic. We were so concerned with the bottle of pills that many chose this form as a way to continue to go out on the field. It's such an interesting moment in that space, and it is going to be really neat to see it become an industry, become a business, and to see athletes as the pioneers of it.
That's a great point you said about the private equity and like the different stages, because just like venture capital, Series A, seed round, Series B, late stage, there's similar, there's a similar level when it comes to private equity, based on the revenue of the company that you're getting in. You got little cap, mid-market cap, big cap. So I love that you pointed that out, and I am interested as well, because cannabis, a lot of people think of it as recreational, but a lot of athletes are using it for a number of different uses. So you want to segue to the next story?
Let's do it. You get the lead in, because this is one that I think is really interesting.
Yeah, so for our next story is really interesting. Fernando Tatis Jr., baseball player, just signed a very big deal. He's a 22-year-old shortstop, signed a $340 million deal over 14 years. I wish I would have played baseball, seeing some of these contracts that they're making.
14 years, dude? Like, your career's going out as a teacher? Like, come on.
Yeah, but check this out. He has to give up a small percentage of his fortune to Big League Advance. So Big League Advance, for context, was a company founded in 2016 by former minor league pitcher Michael Schwimmer to invest in prospects making low salaries. We all know, minor league baseball players don't make that much, but they can, potentially make a lot of money if they make it to the MLB. So if you want to think of it along the lines of stock traders buying Apple and the company's year early. So it's almost like an opportunity to invest in young prospects and betting on them that they're going to make it big. So Tatis agreed to receive money from Big League Advance when he was just a budding prospect, and in exchange for part of his future salary. So in this case, I guess both parties won out, but where do you see this going in the future?
So I think this is so interesting, because there are so many elements of it as treating athletes as a business and looking at them and saying, number one, what is Big League Advance? That is doing all these analytics and data. What they're doing is simply indexing minor leagues. And as we look at, from an investment strategy, the difference between active investing, I think I can pick the next all-star I bet if there's 50 of them, one or two of them is going to hit. And so that is the concept. That is the mindset that they are looking at and saying, hey, I don't know which one of these guys. And they are particularly looking at those lower paid. I love what Tatis said. He said, when I signed this in 2018, I was only 18. And I needed food. I needed to go train. I needed to get into the nicer facilities to up my game. That's what I used this upfront money for. And so he looked at it, and this is who they are trying to help. And they are looking at their first fund of 77 players, and about half of them made it into Major League Baseball. And so it's really a form of fantasy sports comes to real life. You really want to have a part ownership or an invested interest in one of these athletes' careers. You can do it with this upfront cost of investing and getting equity in them. I also had to point out, because one of the interesting parts of that article said Tatis's father is the only Major League Baseball player to hit 2 grand slams in 1 inning. I just think that's a fun stat. Like that's the kind of stuff to me that I look at and I'm like, what? So as I look at this going forward, the biggest hurdle right now is companies like Big League Advance are not being regulated by the Players Association. they are technically outside of the collective bargaining agreement and not being regulated or controlled by the union. So when people come to sue them, when people come to object to or discriminate what they are doing, they are kind of in the Wild West. They're able to operate on their own. I think as this format and this being kind of there's already been one big lawsuit, but this being obviously the biggest headline deal, it's one of the biggest deals in sports history over 14 years. As these deals come to fruition and as the payouts start to be better known and better understood, you are going to see Major League Baseball, you are going to see agents, you are going to see financial advisors sit down and truly need to educate what this exchange is for. You are giving away a future upside for a guaranteed income today. It is no different than an annuity. Something that people come at me all the time and say is, should I get this life insurance policy that has this other element to it, blah, blah, blah. If you're comfortable saying, I'm okay not hitting a home run, I'm okay giving up the future, as long as I have this consistent stream, that is the exchange. Tatis at an early stage exchanged the risk for a little bit of return and a little bit of upfront structure. And so I think these are really interesting contracts. I love the idea of minor leaguers joining together and bonding, but the headline here is $340 million. Well, wait. He doesn't actually get all of that. Let's say it's 10%, $34 million is going to go back into this big league advance. So I hope that doesn't scare future minor leaguers away from, hey, this upside, this opportunity on the back end. It will be kind of, and I love Mike Trout. Mike Trout was asked about this deal as he signed a $400 million deal. I mean, this young man at 22 is still walking away with a guaranteed $150 million contract over the next 15 years. So to me, he's still winning. If he uses it the right way, it is still generational wealth. But do you think that lack of upside and that, if I hit that $300 million, a big chunk of it, do you think that will scare off future minor leaguers?
It's tough to say. I think it's really interesting too. I was just interested why he wanted to sign with BLA or Big League Advance. His father, was in the big leagues, made about $18 million over the course of his career. I'd imagine he could probably get a loan from his dad, to possibly create that stability. On one side of me is like, all right, take the advance. Minor leaguers, they have it really tough. Playing, game after game, and under unfortunate circumstances. You're not getting as many resources as you are if you're in the MLB. So having that money can, provide some stability, which will in turn return, hopefully improve your performance, which will in return hopefully give you a better chance to make it to the MLB sooner. But at the end of the day, when you do make that big contract, the fact that you have to owe somebody, it's almost a give and take. So understanding that aspect, I do think is going to be tough moving forward. A lot of athletes are going to have a tough decision to make, and I definitely think there's going to be unique alternatives around it. So I feel like there's going to be companies where just will give you like a loan without having to pay back at that percentage, or maybe like interest. There's going to be different ways around it, and I only think it's going to get more complex. So with financial experts on your team, business managers, and obviously the MLBPA, they all definitely got to get involved and hopefully, find a pathway that suits everyone involved.
And this is a time where I want to welcome people up to comment. I mean, a few former athletes are in the room. I would love to know if